One of these crossbows really likes the 150 grain Swacker 3-inch broadhead. The other crossbow couldn't care less. Which crossbow is which? And is the Swacker crossbow broadhead right for you and your crossbow? That is this episode of Death by Bunjie. Right there it is. The Swackers. The Swacker massive 3-inch cut. 150 grain. So.
It's Swacker, not Swacker. It's Swacker.
It's Swacker?
Swacker.
No, it's Swacker.
No.
Hacker.
You say it Swacker. That's how literally everybody says it.
No, that's different broadheads. These are Swackers. If you stick around, I'll share the proper pronunciation with you in this video. I did have an increased interest in these Swacker broadheads this last couple of years. I've had a package of these laying around for a long time, but I had a little bit of interest in them over the last couple of years as I struggled with penetration issues with the original Bunjie, with the OB. You've seen me have some issues getting passed through on deer and hogs and all that good stuff, and struggling with that. There's no way he survives that.
No.
Didn't pass through.
That's through everything.
It was a good shot, but...
I mean, we're crossbow hunters. I'm not supposed to be struggling with penetration. That's not supposed to be an issue. It really hadn't been an issue throughout much of my crossbow hunting career. I started hunting with the OB back in 2010 and got pass through after pass through. I was a little less than happy, less than satisfied, let's say, with the small wounds left by the fixed blades, the bolt cutters that I was using back then. So I went to a larger cutting diameter broadhead. I started using the X-Act from Excalibur. Perfectly good broadhead. It's a different design, the fold down style or design. And I was getting penetration fine with that broadhead. I switched later on to a larger cutting diameter broadhead, the Rage Crossbow Hypodermic 100 grain, and on a perfect rib shot, going through the ribs, double lung shot, no problem with penetration, no problem with pass-throughs. Until I got into bigger animals. My big buck in 2019, through the arrow went out the other side. He dropped it 30, 40 yards along the trail. Did get a pass through technically, but it wasn't passing through instantaneously the way I had become accustomed to it happening. Plain and simple, it's a whole different ball game with that older, slower crossbow. I mean, the results with the Rages are undeniable. They're beautiful. When you get a pass through with a Rage, that 2-inch cutting diameter, wow. This is a perfectly good example of the arrows that I was using. It's a ProFlight from Excalibur. Got a Burt Coyote Luminox. Love the Luminox. Love a lighted knock. But the Rage Crossbow Hypodermic 100 grain on the end of that doesn't really... This is a pretty light arrow. I mean, this whole setup right here is about 362 grains or so. And with an older, slower crossbow, that's really not going to give you enough momentum to really push that through a larger animal, right? And we saw that time and time again. And you can go with heavier arrows on those older, slower crossbows. They work great, but then you end up with an even slower crossbow. When it is wide open, that's what we got right there. That is a Rage Crossbow Hypodermic 100 grainer. And you can see a very stout angle on that. Very aggressive angle. And what I mean by that is it's almost flat, right? But it is a 2-inch cutting diameter, a beautiful broadhead. Are you focusing on eyes now? You have eye focus that you didn't tell me about? The problem for me with an older, slower crossbow, when this hits an animal on the hide, it almost acts like a judo point, right? It almost is enough to slow down momentum. It eats a lot of momentum. It takes a lot of momentum just to open the blades, right? To bust out the little tabbies and open the blades. Not a lot, but it takes like 70 foot-pounds of kinetic energy or so just to open them. And once they're opened properly, now it's going to take a little bit of oomph a little bit of energy to push those blades because of that steep angle through the animal. We can contrast that with one of these bad boys that was sent to me by a friend of Bunjie. Look at that bad boy. You can see the difference, and you can tell why this one would probably be more successful penetrating an animal. There are two reasons. One is it's considerably smaller, obviously, but the other reason is it's got a much more sleek angle to it. The downfall of this for me, it's a great broadhead, don't get me wrong. Can't wait to test this thing, play around with it. Don't think I'll hunt deer with it or anything like that. This certainly has its application in my book, but it's just not my go-to broadhead or anything like that. I like a bigger cutting diameter. And that's one of the reasons I started looking at the Swackers. Now we're looking at cutting diameter, folks. This right here is the mother of all broadheads. Sliced twice indeed. This is a 3-inch Swacker, 150 grainer, and I gotta tell you, I really like them. There's a lot that I like about these broadheads. They're a different style of cut. Now you look at this, and when you look at that broadhead when it's open, I'm gonna show you that again here. When you look at that broadhead when it's open, you can see it has that same aggressive cutting angle, right? It's not the sleek angle giving you a nice mechanical advantage that you have with that fixed blade broadhead. I mean, this more aggressive angle like that, that's going to take a lot of energy to push through a deer, right? Yeah, it is. But here's the neat thing about these. These open inside the animal, right? If you look, there's a 1-inch cut on the entrance wound, but the exit wound, when it's on its way out, makes that 3-inch cut. To demonstrate this, I'm going to show you a video from our 3rd ever Death by Bunjie meet and greet, a video I shot talking to Jim from Backyard Broadheads, where he demonstrates this concept perfectly.
I just want to show the difference about how these broadheads open up, because this one is completely open like this before it goes into your animal, and this one, when it hits these tabs, these blades open up. But I'm going to demonstrate that. So this is going to represent like the deer hide. So this one's going to go in, and it's going to push those, the hide is going to push those blades back. And that's going to be open. See how it's opened up before it goes into the animal?
That one is kind of like these rages.
It's going to go into the hide first, and you can see those blades starting to come out, but they are not open yet. But if you push this further, they're actually opening up inside of the animal. So they're opening up right after they get into the animal.
We have had the opportunity to use the 3-inch Swacker on several different occasions with our crossbows here on Death by Bunjie. Starting at the meet and greet, there was a whole story behind that. Go back and check it out. But Genevieve and I ended up switching crossbows around. Neither of us was using the crossbow we intended to use, that we planned on using. And I just threw together the OB with a spinal tap, an entire arrow set up weighing close to 600 grains, and fired that out of the original Bunjie at around 250 feet per second. On a 40-yard shot, I got a pass-through on a wild boar. And the exit wound with these Swacker broadheads went out the shoulder of that boar. Can you believe that? What a shot. And what a blood trail. I mean, that was a really good testament in my book why I should be using that broadhead with an older, slower crossbow like Bunjie. I mean, that was the best blood trail I've ever seen in my whole time hunting. Now, that penetration is in part because of that heavier arrow on that older, slower crossbow. You get increased penetration with a heavier arrow. But it's also a result, I believe, of that Swacker broadhead and the fact that it doesn't rob the arrow of all of its momentum right on the entrance. Instead, it saves some of that for the exit. That's why I got that pass-through. But that wasn't enough for me. That wasn't enough for Bunjie. On our way to Maine to hunt black bears, Bunjie and I went with the Maine Hunter arrow. When in Maine, you use Maine Hunter arrows, right? We screwed on a 150 grain Swacker 3-inch crossbow broadhead, and kaboom, what do you got? You got about 506 total grains of arrow weight, and we got a pass through on our first black bear. Can you believe that? 160-pound dry sow pass through. That arrow was left along the trail, leaving an entrance wound of about 1 inch, exit wound of 3 inches. I got to tell you, in my honest opinion, that bear would not have ever been found on a shot like that. It was back a little bit, got the guts. that 3-inch broadhead saved the day. I do believe that. In both the boar hunt and the bear hunt, the animals ran off with the Luminoc going through the woods. Still got pass-throughs on both of those animals with an older, slower crossbow shooting around 300 feet per second. It's almost like the perfect amount of momentum, the perfect amount of penetration. We got enough to get a blood trail off both sides of the animal, and the arrow eventually got us a pass-through so it's not obstructing the flow of blood one way or another. But it didn't bury itself 2 feet into the dirt so we can't find it or go sailing off 100 yards or anything like that. Pretty cool. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about deer, Rich? Do you shoot any deer with these broadheads? Yes, we do, as a matter of fact. Genevieve and I went to Maryland for our annual trip to Maryland, and Genevieve shot 2 deer down there. You should go watch these videos. These videos are awesome. The spike that she shot didn't get much of a blood trail. That deer ran off and had such a large exit wound on a smaller deer like that it actually filled up the exit wound with one of the lungs. I mean, the lung was hanging out of the exit wound. That's not good. I mean, that kind of plugs the wound so you don't get the blood trail, right? And it wasn't a great blood trail. Now, this deer died in 50 yards or so. No deer's going to live an awful long time with one of its lungs outside of its body. I'm not too concerned about that. I mean, if you inflict that kind of damage with a broadhead, you should be able to find that deer. And we didn't have any trouble locating it. It took 5 minutes to find the deer, but it wasn't the greatest blood trail, if you know what I mean. Now, contrast that with her buck. She heart shot her buck. Beautiful angle from a tree stand coming down, 1-inch exit wound, top of the heart, going out through the middle of the heart and exiting lower than the heart. That lower exit wound, holy cow, that was like tied for the best blood trail I've ever seen in my life. Okay, Rich, did you shoot any deer? Yeah, I did manage to shoot a doe in Maryland with Bunjie 3.0, the Scorpion Deathstalker 420, shooting Deathstalker arrows around 425 grains, I think, 383 feet per second with a 150 grain Swacker. No problems with the pass-through. I mean, this thing was through that deer and buried in the dirt on the other side before the deer had a chance to react. Period. It was done. The deal is done before that deer had any opportunity whatsoever to even blink, right? The deer ran off. I could see her shovel running toward the end of the trail as she ran out of sight. I mean, she was doomed from the beginning, and we found that deer. Probably went 40 to 50 yards. Didn't have any trouble locating that deer. I didn't even really look for the blood trail because I had seen where it went. And oh yeah, look at that. Now that, pretty aggressive cutting angle, but man, what a mean looking broadhead that is, huh? That's the bolt cutter from Excalibur. Pretty typical look for a 3-blade, fixed blade broadhead. But really, here's the thing that's attractive about these broadheads. Look at the two of them in comparison. I mean, if you're a deer, which one do you want to get shot with, right? I mean, come on. It's a no-brainer. Now, I know everybody's going to say, well, if you shoot a deer with this, if you're accurate, it doesn't make any difference, right? You can kill a deer with a field point, blah, blah, blah. But guess what? Even if you're not accurate, I'd rather have this one. My guide in Maryland, when he saw the damage that the 3-inch Swacker created on those deer, he's like, man, I wish everybody would use those. He has too many people who he guides who use smaller diameter broadheads. And he said the problem with those is they make a hole the size of a nickel. And I'm like, man, you are talking about the bolt cutter. That is exactly the size of it. You're going to get great penetration out of this. Fantastic penetration. But it's because it's small, right? That's one reason. It's because it's small. It's because it's not doing as much. Obviously, it takes more energy to push something like this through an animal. But I do believe that most modern crossbows possess the amount of energy necessary to push this through the other side of a deer. I mean, come on. If the original Bunjie can push this out the other side of a wild boar at 40 yards, it's going to work on deer, right? I always find it interesting that the people who promote broadheads like this one are interested in Plan B arrows. You know, a arrow that's going to perform if your shot isn't perfect. What about Plan B broadheads? Like, if your shot's not perfect, which one do you want? What if it doesn't open? Oh no. You know, my fixed blade broadhead, this is always going to open. I never have to worry about whether it opens or not. Well, even if this broadhead does not open, it's a 1-inch cutting diameter. It's the same as this one, even if it doesn't open. And if it does open, and it's gonna open, I mean, come on, it's gonna open, right? And when it does that kind of damage. Some other quick things I like about the Swacker broadheads is that it has a chisel tip on it. I'm a big fan of chisel tips. If you want to break through some bone, you hit a shoulder blade, something like that, I would rather use a chisel than the tip of a knife. That's like my favorite tip. Another thing I really like about these broadheads, if you look at it, it is smooth here and smooth there. Many of these broadheads, the other style of broadhead, when the blades are open, the end of one of the blades will stick through the other side, and you get these little feet that stick out on the other sides of that broadhead. To me, that's something that reduces penetration. It seems like common sense to me. Another thing I really like about these Swackers is the fact that they come with a practice point. And these practice points, I have a lot of faith in them because they look exactly the same as one of the real broadheads closed up. They're like the same thing. They're the same size, same design. How many times have you seen some of these practice heads that come with them and they'll say, oh, it's a matched point. It's exactly the same thing. Flies the same as the broadheads that are in the package. But it doesn't even look like the broadheads that are in the package. I mean, come on. At least make it look like the broadhead so that I feel a little more comfortable with it before I just take your word for it, okay? But this actually is a broadhead. It's even sharpened, okay? They've even sharpened these little blades sticking out here, just the same as the blades in the actual broadhead. What's sweet about that is these things fly exactly the same as a field point out of Bunjie Junior, and Bunjie 3.0. All of them seem to love these broadheads as far as accuracy is concerned. And what do we say about accuracy here on Death by Bunjie? Accuracy is #1 with crossbows. That's a big difference between this and the bolt cutters. With a bolt cutter, that broadhead, you put that on there, it won't fly the same from one arrow to another, let alone two of them flying the same or anything like a field point whatsoever. They do their own thing. They got a mind of their own. We did have to get bigger stirrups on both Bunjie Junior and the original Bunjie to use these broadheads safely, the way that we're accustomed to using them. I've mentioned this before in other videos, but it's very important to me to have the broadhead fully contained within the stirrup. If I'm carrying the crossbow, doing a spot and stalk or something like that, or if I'm sitting in a blind with the crossbow down, sitting on the ground, I don't want the broadhead sticking out and getting caught in the dirt or getting caught on brush. I also, if I go to decock Bunjie, or Genevieve wants to decock her crossbow Bunjie Junior, when she puts her foot in the stirrup, if this broadhead is still in there, it will kick the broadhead out of the way. In other words, she won't be decocking that arrow through her foot. Now, should you be using Swackers? I've been very clear about this on Death by Bunjie. I am not sponsored by Swacker or any other company for that matter. Don't be hunting with an Excalibur just because I did for 11, now 12 seasons. Don't be buying a Scorpion just because I'm now shooting a Scorpion. Don't use Swackers just because Rich does, okay? Just because we use them on Death by Bunjie. Maybe try them out, right? But you got to see if this stuff is right for you and your crossbow hunting method. I'd suggest that you take a look at them. They're a very interesting design. I was a little leery of getting on the Swacker train 10 years ago because they were new. But now they've been around for a long time, and they're a tested design. And a lot of friends of Bunjie love them. And I'm starting to really appreciate them too. So that makes me feel a lot more confident heading into the woods with them. So really my thoughts on this, I think the greater penetration that you get with a Swacker broadhead, that style of broadhead, is very valuable if you're shooting an older, slower crossbow like the original Bunjie, like the OB. What a great crossbow. On the other hand, if you're shooting a more modern crossbow like Bunjie 3.0 here, you got a lot more options. Maybe Rage is your friend. And on that note, I can tell you that with the original Bunjie, to the extent that he goes out into the woods anymore, the original Bunjie, the OB, will be using the Swacker going forward, most likely. For Bunjie 3.0, maybe we go back to the Rages. I think now with 383 feet per second on those arrows, there's enough momentum there to push that 2-inch tripan through a deer. For Genevieve and Bunjie Jr., around 350 feet per second with her micro suppressor 355, that is Bunjie Jr., I can tell you she's pretty much sticking with the Swackers. And that leaves us with only one question to answer, and that is, how do you pronounce it? Well, obviously, it's Swacker. Swacker. It's not Schwacker because it's not SHW. Hacker. Well, let's ask Google.
Swacker.
Oh, there you go. I hope you got a kick out of this video. And until next time, all hail Bunjie.